End of support. You've heard about it. We know it's bad. But how bad is it? Here you go. This is your picture right there that you can go ahead and send to the people. Officially, we say it's not that bad. It's still not that bad. So here we kind of liken it to living on an earthquake fault, right? You know it's coming. Something bad's going to happen. You don't know when. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel problems and pains, and at some point, it's going to be really bad for you. So you'd like to go ahead and move away from that place before you finally make the fault finally snaps. All right, so here are the facts. Updates will cease. So as you guys are aware, we get tons of updates for Windows Server 2003. Matter of fact, any Microsoft product gets a ton of updates. On the bright side, you'll stop getting those. You don't have to worry about that anymore. On the downside, you're not going to get any updates anymore. So the fact that you're not going to get your security patches, you're not going to get any of the fixes. People will still be finding exploits on these servers. They never stop looking for those. Microsoft will stop caring about them and will stop fixing that, which means if your server is in any way internet-facing or is any way on your network, if it's not turned off and buried, it becomes more and more vulnerable as you get past the July 15th date. Updates will also probably cease for your applications. So application vendors are really happy that Server 2003 is going end of life, because that means they no longer have to develop for 2003. They can just say, sorry, we don't support that anymore because Microsoft doesn't. You're going to have to upgrade that stuff to the newer version. So you'll be running at a locked level of functionality on those old programs. You'll be out of compliance. Some of you need, due to regulations or whatnot, to be in compliance with PCI data security standards, HIPAA regulations, etc. If you're in one of those fields, you typically have signed agreements saying that you will be in compliance. And if you're not, then you fall out of compliance, and that's a bad thing TM. In addition, manufacturers won't even be producing hardware for this, and that's a bit of a problem. Not for some of you. I know some of you are very comfortable with this. However, if your server crashed and you needed to restore from backups, providing your backups are good, and you need to go purchase a new server in order to put to reload your OS onto, you're going to have to go to eBay. You're going to have to go to eBay and pick up some servers in order to basically hope that they will work, because the newer versions, the newer generations of servers just don't handle Server 2003 anymore. It's the end of life. They don't care. No server is safe. All Windows Server 2003 are affected. Whether virtual or physical, they won't pass compliance audit, and many applications will cease to be supported. Waiting costs more. Maintenance cost goes up. You're now troubleshooting problems that you will get if you call Microsoft a best effort to fix. They won't really, they don't promise they're going to resolve it. They're not going to stay on the phone with you forever. They're going to say, here you go, I hope this works, good luck. Which means it's more tech time put in to try to solve these problems, more research time, more analysis that you have to do in order to figure out how you fix the current problems that you've got on unsupported software. And here it says you have to isolate your 2003 servers with more advanced firewalls. I say just turn them off and hide them, because you don't want that kind of risk in your environment when you have a server that is no longer supported. Most of you went through this with XP machines. XP boxes being unsupported meant that your users were also putting their computers at risk anytime they browsed or whatnot, and it put your whole network at risk. So people moved away from XP. Some of you are still running XP machines, but this is at a more serious level, as it's server level. And we know what you're thinking. Migration is long and exhausting. It is, right? So not sugarcoating it, nobody wants to do it. You're here because you haven't done it yet, right? Like, you've taken your servers, and you've run them as far as you can, but you know the deadline's coming. Remember, at the end of the journey, though, look how pretty this place is. This is what it's going to be like, complete with ducks. I don't know what this is, but yes. Aflac. All right. Here are where the opportunities open up, though. So we can get you to a beautiful place. You can get there because you get to start using things like virtualization and cloud computing. Some of you are already on virtual platforms. Others you may not. Virtualization gives you a lot of benefits that you don't necessarily even see. Like, there's cost benefits. You don't have to buy a whole bunch of servers. You get yourself a nice beefy one. When you get additional requirements, like, hey, the software says they need a new server, you spin it up in your virtual environment, you pay for the licensing fee, and you call it a day. You don't have to go order a server, put the OS on, and do all that stuff. It also gives you a lot of manageability. If you are performing upgrades on software, or you're trying to make some changes, but you're not sure how it's going to affect your network, just snapshot it. You basically just save your server in a state, you go make your changes, and if it breaks, you just revert it back. Virtualization gives you a lot of benefits. And if you're moving off of old hardware, you can go ahead and look, hey, maybe we should go to next generation virtualization. Cloud computing is basically virtualization except on other people's hardware. That's where you don't even have to worry about getting the hardware. You go ahead and you go to the cloud. Other people host your information. They host your servers. You connect to it remotely. 64-bit performance. 64-bit, as you know, is twice as much as 32. Is the performance level actually twice as good? But it opened up new architecture for people to be able to code on, so the applications may be more robust. Moving your infrastructure from a capital expense to an operational expense. What this means is, again, this is kind of the difference between virtualizing locally or going to the cloud. A capital expense model is one where you pay up front for all the things that you need. Knowing that you need to refresh your servers means that you may have to purchase a whole bunch of servers, may have to purchase a whole bunch of OS licensing and all that kind of stuff. And that's one giant upfront cost that is often a barrier to entry for people to upgrade. They're like, you know what, we'll just wait and try not to deal with this for a bit. An operational expense lets you kind of basically, you're going to pay for it every month. It's going to be roughly the same. You pay for it like it's a utility. You can do this when you go into the cloud and using something known as SPLA licensing, which is Service Provider Licensing Agreement. This means that you're actually licensing your licenses are a month-to-month basis kind of pay. So you pay for your server on a monthly basis. You pay for your licensing on a monthly basis. It's going to be much smaller, at least initially, than the CapEx. Eventually, obviously, the OpEx will eventually cost more than the CapEx, but you don't have to lose your cash flow to that. Again, that's something for the bean counters, but it's something to consider. What to do? Pretending the problem isn't there isn't really an option. So here's your process in a nutshell, and each one of these points has probably about 100 steps underneath them. We'll cover them topically. Discovery. This is where you identify, catalog your software, and the workloads currently running on your server environment. Assessment. This is where you figure out the applications and workloads based on type, criticality, complexity, and risk. Targeting. Figuring out where you're going to put this stuff. Are you going to go ahead and make it virtual? Are you going to go ahead and put it in a physical box? What kind of physical box? Those kinds of things. And migration. You've figured out everything else, and now you need to actually move the data from one to the other. And that, of course, comes with its own problems. Discovery. So we're going to go through these steps in a little bit more detail, starting with discovery. Remembering that the operating system is in many respects the least important component of your old server. The applications do all the heavy lifting. In the discovery process, you dig through and find every application that currently resides on your server. This includes the ones that you're using daily and some of the ones that you have long since forgotten about that may or may not be doing anything, but you're going to have to relook at those. Then assessment. Done right, the assessment process should be both exhaustive and exhausting. You need to go through each application and determine a couple of things. Do we still want it? Do we still need this? Are we using it? Is there a business reason for it? Is there something out there that does this better? Are we using something that does this better? Do we need this? If we want to keep it, do we need to upgrade? It's likely that any application you have running on 2003, especially if you actually currently still have 2003 servers in your environment, are probably not up to date. The latest versions don't often support 2003. A lot of the developers have actually long since kind of supported it. Eventually, though, they are going to all get rid of it. So now that you're migrating to a new server, you can take advantage of the enhanced capabilities that they've built into your software. In addition, that old stuff that's on that server might not even work on 2008 or 2012, so you might have to upgrade. Licensing implications, everyone's favorite topic. Licensing is just basically this whole confusopoly out there about what you need to do to make it happen. The mission-critical software, often like ERPs and Microsoft operating systems, they love when you do upgrades because they know that they're kind of mandatory, you need to do it, and that's when they often will get you with licensing. Well, you have to at least call them up, ask the right questions, and figure out, does this mean I have to pay more? In the Windows world, the answer is if it's your first 2012 server, yeah, you're going to have to pay more. And if you do upgrade, what are the training implications? Your users are very much used to what they're doing. And everyone gets very comfortable with what they know. When you make upgrades, and you upgrade software, you upgrade the hardware, when you upgrade anything, something's going to change for the user. And you have to identify what that's going to be and get in front of it so that your users are not as disrupted as they could be. Some of you who work directly in IT know that our job is to be invisible. If they notice us, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. So the better we can do on this, the less likely we are going to have to face people staring at us going, why did you do this to me? And if there's no upgrade path, that software hasn't been updated in 10 years, it's been abandoned, you guys are using it, great, but now's a good time to think about replacing it. If you're considering getting off 2003, it means that you would like to be kind of stay within support. If you want to stay in support and your business uses any of these applications, you want to make sure that if something goes wrong, you have someone you can call that understands it. So you want to make sure that you're with someone that keeps you up to date and keeps you supported. So if there's no upgrade path, they're probably not the right people for you. So you have to figure out what application will best replace the old one, which is often, it involves a lot of research, it involves requesting demos. A single Google search saying this probably has my features is just not going to cut it in the real world. But if there is an upgrade path for the old software, how do you do it? A lot of good companies will go ahead and give you the upgrade path on their website. Or if you call them up, they'll just send you a document. Some leave it up as an exercise for the reader to figure out how to make that happen. So if you don't have a clear upgrade path, you have to work on creating one yourself, testing it, making sure it works, before you go ahead and implement it into a live environment. Proceed with caution. Before we move on to the discussion of targeting, this word of caution. There's a lot of advice out there, more advice than is actually helpful. This document is probably on the easiest part of your upgrade. This is provided by Microsoft, and this talks about how to migrate your roles. So the roles obviously are the default functionality of your server. They have this multi-step process from easy to hard of all the things you would need to do to make this happen. And like I said, I feel like this is the easiest part. This might be more in-depth than anyone would ever need, but it's still out there. So doing your own research might mean taking a look at documents and trying to figure out what you're going to keep and what you're going to throw away and how much of it you're going to be used. Because some of them get into a ton of detail, and some of them are just like, yeah, just move it to the new server, call it a day. Whatever that means. Targeting. The next step is targeting, where you identify the server or servers that will replace the old one. You will, of course, be buying new servers, since any machine that's running 03 is way past its target date. So you have 64-bit is greater than 32-bit. You can tell because the number's bigger. Virtualization and cloud computing. We had discussed earlier about how virtualization can help you and how cloud computing is one of the ways that can help you. This is basically taking things and virtualizing is taking you to this generation. Cloud computing is kind of taking you to next generation. Testing. This step is testing. And by this point, you'll be eager to get the show on the road. However, careful testing is important for a successful completion of migration. Basically, you know where you're going to put it. You've purchased the stuff you're going to put it there. And now you have to figure out, is this going to work or not? Are my users going to be happy? You have to perhaps set up a user test group and say, hey, you guys, in addition to all the work that you're doing today, I'm sure you have plenty of spare time, please test this over there. Or more likely, the IT staff will be testing and hoping that they know what their users do on a day-to-day basis. So you have a lot of testing you have to do before you go ahead and get to the migration step. This is where the data actually gets to move on. How is it different? Or how is it done? differently for every one of you, right? Whether you have just a single server that you're taking and you're migrating, and you're working maybe a 9-to-5 shop, maybe you're a 24/7 shop, and migrating the data is going to be very disruptive for your users. So you have to figure out, do I keep things in tandem? Do I keep things up and set up a whole new environment and just allow the testing, which would be great? Or do I have to set up a live environment and just move people surreptitiously? So the migration path is a really important step, one that must be carefully laid out, carefully planned out. And then once you're done migrating, then we're back to testing. Because you've done it, and as you know, if you've done a lot of work in this, you're surprised when it works right the first time. So you're going to move it. You're going to find all the things that you didn't know that existed. Your users are going to find that. Hopefully it's a test group and not all the live users. You're going to test and retest and test again until finally you're at that place where it's better, right? You're finally at that paradise place with the duck that's saying Affleck at you, and things are good because all your users, you've moved everything off. You can sleep at night because you've got a server that's in support. You can sleep at night because you've got an environment that is up to date and should last you a number of years. 2003 has lasted you 12 years now. So how long could the other one last? Are there any questions? Anything specific that I can go over? Thank you. What's that? Sure. 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 Well, so yeah, there you've got one where you're trying to minimize the impact to your end user, right? And minimize your own personal work, right? Because ultimately, you're moving a file server from here to here. You've got mappings to consider. You have security associations to consider, et cetera. So it depends on your tolerance for the company, right? So if you upgrade to the newest version of AD, you might get more functionality control in your group policies, where you might be able to push out that so you don't have to necessarily just kind of replace the name. You can also use CNAME if you're trying to keep the name the same so that you don't have to go. But it is identifying whether you're using hard-coded mappings, are you using GPO mappings, like how exactly your users are logging in. So those are the considerations you have to make. Do you know if specifically you just have hard-coded mappings and that's why you had to kind of run with the whole throw the server up the air, put a new one down with the same name? Is that what was going on? Gotcha. All of those right. Sure. So there's a controversy within my own company about whether or not we feel CNAMEs are good enough. I tend to like the fact of CNAMEs. That's where you have an alternate name in DNS so that you call the new server something new, but anything that's pointing to the old DNS name will point to the new server. Eventually, as you get new machines in, you kind of cycle those out, and you don't keep it and you try to set it up so that eventually that all goes away. It can be slightly confusing for a technician that's going in there, pinging the name of a server, finding out it's another server, but as long as it's well documented, that is typically a way that you can do that to try to keep things easier for you. Yes. Sure. Right. Sure. So there. So your assumption is actually incorrect. When you purchase a new server, and by the way, there's two that are past server 2003. Right now it's 2008, 2012. When you buy a 2012 license, it'll actually apply at 2012, whether you install 2012 or 2008. So it's actually the same license. Microsoft says, I don't care what you install behind that. So ultimately, the newest one is being the most recent means it's the one that's going to get end of support the latest, which means you won't have to worry about this for longer. That said, there's a lot of things to consider. 2012 is built off of Windows 8 technology. If any of you have used Windows 8, you know that it was kind of designed for a touchscreen. Having a server whose interface was designed for touchscreen is just a bad idea. It works fine. I've gotten used to it. I don't hate it as much anymore. But ultimately, the Server 2012 and the functionality of Server 2012 actually it's a lot of great stuff. It just took a little bit to kind of get used to. So my recommendation ultimately is move to 2012. It's no less expensive moving 2008, and it has newer and better features. It's just if you're used to working on XP and working in 2003, it is a big jump for a user who has to use that technology than moving from 2003 to 2008. Does that answer that question? You mean upgrading the OS? Oh man, have you ever tried that? That is okay. All right, so sure, an in-place upgrade is the biggest myth when it comes to the Microsoft server world. Basically, they'd like to pretend that you could go ahead and download Server 2008, probably not likely 2012, and then just layer that on top of your 2003. This is just never going to work. All your applications are going to break. Nothing's going to work. You're going to be left with a server that doesn't do anything useful. So you can try. And matter of fact, you got a virtual server, go ahead and snapshot it, run it, see what happens. You know, just if it's not virtual though, you probably don't want to necessarily go down that road because it's irreversible as a part, unless you revert to backups, and it will break 90% of the things on there. It typically will upgrade the Windows stuff just fine. But if you have any applications running on that server, it's probably bad. So, you know, if it's just a server and it's just a file server, you might be able to get away with it. But don't ever tell me that I told you that, because you just try to avoid that. That's exactly it, right. Yeah, and if it's just a domain controller, you just make a new server, and you DC promo it, and you just decommission the other one. Right? You move some FSMO roles if you need to. Right. Right. I mean, one of the reasons why you try to tend to avoid doing in-place upgrades is because that server already has problems, promise, and you don't want to go ahead and bring that up. Like, if you're going to spend the time and the money to go ahead and get yourself a new operating system, go ahead and install it fresh. So, physical versus virtual domain controller. That's always a question. Domain controllers ultimately don't have to be on terribly expensive hardware, so you can get yourself a PC-grade computer and run a server on it and go ahead and make it physical. People worry that if their virtual environment goes down or the virtual environment has some slowness, say in their SAN or whatnot, having a physical server there would allow them to continue working, at least log in at a regular speed, and at least get their authentication at a regular speed. So I like having one physical on site, but that might just be a curmudgeon holdover for me, because ultimately, if everything is slow because your SAN is slow, logging in is probably the least of your worries. Right? Like, you're going to log in, it's going to take some time, and then no one's going to be able to do anything. So I feel like I always say, let's go ahead and put it out there, but it might be overkill. So that's all. Do you have ammunition to go back and try to explain what's going on, or do you feel like okay. Sure. can always get, yeah, so I don't think they've ever gotten rid of DOS per se. Like, you can still hit CMD on any of these machines and pull up the command prompt. Although now in the latest versions, they really want you to use PowerShell because it's much better integrated with the servers. Like, it's much easier to go ahead and create scripts and do things automatically through PowerShell than it would ever be through DOS. Also, I find that I've certainly seen that DOS programs running on old machines were running at a certain speed, and moving them to the faster machines actually makes them run too fast to be useful. So I would tend to, if you're moving away from Server 2003 and Server 2000, to look at non-DOS level applications. Gotcha. Do you know if they support that's a question to ask them to see if they support 2008 or 2012. Yeah. So like that's one of the things I was talking about doing analysis is you've got that application. So talk to that application vendor, right? Like they've got you fixed, but that means you're still having conversation with them, hopefully. Hopefully they're still around. And if they are, say, hey, we're upgrading off 2003. I'm sure we're not your only customer. What do you recommend? How do we make sure that this works? So setting yourself up in the cloud, one, it has a lot of implications. Means a lot, but like doing Active Directory in the cloud. Yeah. So the way that works is that you're authenticating with basically Microsoft Azure. There's like a Microsoft Azure AD authentication. There's a couple of different ways to do it ultimately because it's still a hybrid solution, and you have to decide whether you're going to use single sign-on versus the same sign-on, and those terms are very similar. Single sign-on means that it's all kind of authenticated all throughout. It means that the stuff in the cloud is actually listening to your local environment, and if your local environment crashes, no one's able to connect to it out there. Like you still need the local stuff to make any of this work. And then you have same sign-on, which works very similarly, except same sign-on basically works with DirSync, which is a local program that takes your information and uploads it to the cloud every 15 minutes and says, this is my users, these are their passwords, etc. So if you ever crash locally, it just takes the last information it sent, and people are still able to authenticate that way. But it also means that if you disable a user here, they have 15 minutes to go ahead and wreak havoc before that gets updated. If they update their password in the cloud, it doesn't replicate down, and it's going to get overwritten in 15 minutes. So each of them have kind of different challenges. The single sign-on has the problem of if your site goes down, people can't access it from the outside. It also is more costly when it comes to server resources because you have to get to Active Directory, federated services, and kind of make all of that environment work internally, and then get it so that it replicates out. Anything else? If not, there's food that I would love to eat. It's been taunting me this whole time. I didn't consider that when I said everyone should go eat first. But so yeah, so that's it. That's our presentation and what we got for you. Right, Windows 10, right. Yeah, I think the next one's Server 2015. I could be corrected on that. So they're always working on it. Matter of fact, I'm hoping that the next version of the operating system kind of is a step back towards the Server 2008 and a step back towards the Windows 7 interface. I believe that's what's been requested and most asked for from at least the IT people. Is the same team that's doing, okay. Gotcha. Right. Oh, I haven't looked at it recently, so yeah. Ultimately, what I often recommend to people, and this has nothing to do with this, but this is just for your general knowledge, is Microsoft seems to make really interesting choices when it comes to their operating systems. Everyone knows and loves Windows 98. It was fine. And then you had ME, which is the edition they don't talk about. I think it might stand for Mistake Edition. They came out with XP. XP was wonderful. Came out with Vista, and people came at them with pitchforks, right? And they came out with Windows 7. Everyone was like, oh, good, you finally fixed it, even though basically it was kind of just renaming and adding a couple of things. Uh, and then they came out with Windows 8, which, again, people are kind of coming at them with pitchforks. Because ultimately it was designed for like tablet and handheld users, and most of us are still just using a mouse and keyboard. So I'm really looking forward to what they're getting from the Windows 10, and I'd love to see what they're going to do when it comes to the server operating systems. The server operating systems haven't been that way. I liked NT 2000, 2003, 2008. It was just 2012 that really threw me for a loop when I first kind of walked into that realm. I would hope so. So Microsoft seems to be going to the more cloud-based models with some of their other stuff. Like they got Exchange in the cloud now, and their email in the cloud. And even though they're coming out with a new version of Exchange, that might be the last one that they do. But their operating systems have been, I don't know, because you went 2003 to 2008, 2012 to like 2015. It sounds like they're actually shrinking the years between. So we might actually maybe see 4 years before they go ahead and give that to us. Hopefully by that time you'd be upgrading your equipment. So putting 2008 now shouldn't necessarily hurt you as bad, because you probably have at least 4 years. You can keep asking all you want. I never have to eat. It's fine. No. What's that? Right. So it depends on your definition of interface. Ultimately, there's a lot of different hoops that you can jump through in order to kind of make it work. When you have, it really depends, right? So there are applications that are out there that will talk to the other half of the application, or install a backend and a front end. So nothing really does anything innately short of your phones and getting mail from mail servers, because those things have kind of been designed around that. But you can find applications that replicate a lot of PC functionality. For example, you can do remote desktop. Now, trying to do that from your phone is going to be, hard, but you can still do it because there's remote desktop applications out there. If you want to get yourself files, I typically don't even recommend doing local file storage, right? Like file storage in the cloud, there are enterprise class solutions that are out there to do file storage in the cloud, and your phones will interface with those really well because they were designed around that. The servers are still really designed around kind of PCs connecting to them, or users connecting to them, maybe browsers or whatnot, as opposed to the phones. Did you guys get the information you're looking for? Is there anything that wasn't answered? Okay.